is why you should never leave your house unlocked. Part 1. When I was about 12 years old, I lived in Kansas. Both my parents were out and I was home alone with my 2 dogs. I was sitting in my bedroom playing on my computer when I heard the very distinct sound of the front door open and close, like someone had just come in. My dogs got up and ran into the living room, and so I just assumed my parents were home. I shouted for my mum to confirm this and heard no response. I paused my game and walked out into the living room to see, and as I did, I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I had heard someone come in, clear as day, but no one was there. I wasn't wearing headphones and I'd had the computer volume turned down, so I knew it couldn't have been the game. I tried calling my parents, but neither of them picked up, so for the first time in my life, I called the police. This is why you should never leave your house unlocked. Part 2. I explained the situation to the 911 operator, and she told me that police were on their way. I stood there rooted to the spot, and not long after my parents got home. The police arrived shortly after, and told us that thieves usually wait until homeowners leave, check the door, and if it's unlocked they go in and take valuables. They checked the house, but found no one. They said whoever it was probably left when they heard that someone was home. They told us to make sure that we lock the doors, but not to worry too much. Not long after it happened, I told the story to one of my friends, and he said, "You only heard the door once. That means they were most likely already in the house. You just heard them leave." This is why you should never try using a Ouija board. My friends and I decided to play with a Ouija board after work in our office and spoke to a girl named Quinn. She didn't say much but seemed friendly enough, but when I mentioned my girlfriend, she got super mad and protective of me. When it got to 2 a.m, we said goodbye to her, but about a week later, in the middle of the night, the office block that we worked in burnt down. It creeped us all out, so a week later we used the Ouija board again near a lake and asked for Quinn. When we got through to her, we asked if she started the fire, to which she responded, yes. About 2 weeks later, I was driving to my girlfriend's house with the board in the back of the truck. I didn't know it at the time, but my girlfriend was in fact cheating on me. But I guess Quinn knew because I lost control of the truck and flipped it upside down. When the cops arrived to make sure I was okay, they reminded me what road I was on. Route 666, Virginia.
What's the creepiest thing that's ever happened to you while camping? I was visiting my mum one weekend a few years ago. She desperately wanted to go camping and spend some time together, so I agreed. We went for some lovely walks and had a wonderful time. But on the evening of the last night, we noticed someone standing in the distance watching us. We couldn't see their face as it was dark and they were too far away, but we heard them cackling. The creepiest laugh I've ever heard, and creepy enough for my mum to grab the car keys and start packing up early. We left soon after, but a few days later, we got a visit from the police. I was mortified when they told us a man had been arrested after murdering a family of campers the night we left. I'm just glad we left when we did. I'm almost certain the person we saw watching us was the murderer.
This is why first impressions are not always right. One time Alyssa was driving home from her high school basketball game when she noticed the car was driving closely behind her. At first she thought this must be a coincidence, but every turn she made this car followed, and quickly she became scared. Then this car began flashing its headlights at her every few seconds. At this point Alyssa was terrified. She drove home quickly, got out of her car, and went inside her house to call the police. This car parked right next to her waiting, but no one could expect the true reason why Alyssa was being followed. The police arrived and tried to arrest the man, but he insisted he never did anything wrong. And this is when Alyssa found out the truth. The man pointed to Alyssa's car and there was another man crouched in the backseat with a knife. He had gotten into Alyssa's car right after the basketball game, and the man following Alyssa saw this all happen but had no way to help her. So he followed her home and flashed his headlights every time the man got up to stab her. Turns out the man that Alyssa thought was following her was actually the person that saved her life. Have you let anyone borrow your phone before? One woman let her son borrow her phone, but she could have never expected the terrifying things she saw after she got her phone back. So this woman got her new phone and she put it on the kitchen counter and went to watch some TV. That's when her son came in and asked if he could borrow the phone to play with it. The woman didn't think much of it at first, so she agreed, but she could have never known that this would lead to a terrifying discovery. When it was nighttime, she got ready to tuck her son into bed, so she went upstairs to his room, but he wasn't there. Then she ran over to her room and saw him sleeping on her bed with the new phone in his hand. She felt relieved, so she took her phone phone back and started looking through it. At first, nothing was out of the ordinary. She saw her background had changed, but it wasn't until she saw the photos that she found the horrifying surprise. There were many new photos on her phone that her son took around the house. The front door, the kitchen, and even photos of her taken from the back when she was watching TV. She started deleting these photos until the last one caught her eye. Instantly, she turned around, terrified. It was a photo of her son sleeping in her bed, but it was taken by someone else, someone standing above him, and on the edge of the photo was half of a stranger's face.
Storytime. When I was a child, my family and I moved into a big old 2-story house. Both my parents worked, so I was often home alone when I came home from school. One evening when I came home, the house was still dark. I called out for my mum just in case she was home and heard her sing-song voice reply from upstairs. I called her again as I climbed the stairs to see which room she was in and again heard the same response. We were decorating the house at the time and I didn't quite know my way around the maze of rooms yet, but I knew she was in one of the far ones right down the hall. Just as I reached for the handle of the door to let myself in the room, I heard the front door downstairs open and my mother call out for me. I jumped back terrified and ran down the stairs to her, but as I glanced back, the door to the room slowly opened a crack, and for a brief moment, I thought I saw something staring back at me.
What would you do if this happened to you? Once a young woman named Claudia was about to walk home when it started raining heavily. Not wanting to be rained on, she decided she should get a taxi instead. As she walked down the empty streets past the cemetery, a taxi approached her. She got in and quickly realized something was wrong. She began feeling unusually cold and noticed the windows were covered in ice. Then things got even weirder. Claudia realized that they were going the wrong way. She blurted out to the driver, "We're going the wrong way," but got no response. She raised her hand to tap him on the shoulder and the driver looked back. Claudia let out a scream. She couldn't believe what she saw. The driver's face was withered and pale, his skin clinging tightly to his bones. Claudia began to panic. She tried to open the door and jump out, but nothing worked. She even banged on the windows to try to get passers-by's attention, but nobody heard her. Then, in a fit of desperation, Claudia began to scratch at the driver to make him stop driving. His withered face came off into her hand, revealing a gleaming white skull beneath. Claudia and that taxi was never seen again. This story is the reason why I'll never live alone. Once there was an elderly woman who lived alone in a cabin in the mountains. She lived a quiet life and rarely had visitors. Her husband had passed away recently, so her only companion was her beloved dog. Every night when the woman went to bed, the dog would lick her hand as a way to let her know that he was always there to protect her. But one night the woman was woken up to the sound of her dog whimpering, so she reached her hand below her bed and the dog licked her hand as always. She thought the dog must just be cold, so she didn't think that much of it. In the morning, she stuck her hand out again, but the dog wasn't there anymore. She thought he must be up already and was just wandering around the house, but what she'd find later would terrify her. She heard dripping noises, so she went to the bathroom to see if it was a sink, but it wasn't. Instead, she saw her loving companion hung up by the bathtub, and on the bathroom mirror were the words written in blood, "Humans can lick too."
This is why you should never stay awake past 3 a.m. A woman in her early 20s was away from home on a business trip. The night before she was supposed to board her plane, she had trouble sleeping and had this intense fear that someone was staring at her in her room. She was up until 3, tossing and turning until she started to hear whispers. It was a deep voice repeating the words, "I'm coming to get you, I'm coming to get you." But she ignored it and eventually fell asleep. After her plane landed, she was exhausted but drove home anyway. About 30 minutes into her drive, she started hearing the same whispers from the previous night, but she thought it was because she was sleep deprived, so she kept driving. She was almost home when she began to feel sick. Her eyes were watering, her nose was running, and she let out a large sneeze. "Bless you," said the same deep, eerie voice. She quickly pulled into her driveway, hugged her husband, and sat down to tell him what was going on. When this happened,
I can still hear that voice.
A father went to say goodnight to his son, as it was routine since he knew his son would have trouble sleeping if he didn't. It was a sort of silent tradition between them, one he never forgot to attend. The room was dimly lit by the lamp, but the father could clearly see there was something unusual about the kid tonight. He looked the same, just with a huge grin that drew from ear to ear. "You okay, buddy?" he asked. The son nodded, still grinning, before saying, "Daddy, check for monsters under my bed." The father chuckled and got on his knees to take a look. There under the bed was his son, his real son, pale, trembling, and scared to death. He whispered, "Daddy, There's someone on my bed.
This is the untold truth about Talking Angela. Talking Angela started as a mobile phone app used by a lot of children. Angela is a white cat with blue eyes who has conversations with you and can answer any questions that you ask her. But recently, Talking Angela turned into an app to spy on young children. It's said that the app has been taken over by a creepy man or a creepy group. It's said that if you're over 18, nothing happens. But if you're younger than that, the cat starts asking you very weird questions. Like, where do you live? What is your parents' names? And what is your phone number? The creepy man or the group are able to take videos and pictures of you through your own phone. Also, if you zoom in on Angela's eye, you can see a man watching you. This one time, there was this girl who decided to lie about her age, and she said that she was 30 years old. And to her horror, the cat responded with, "That's a lie. You're about 11 or 12 years old." And the cat was right. Also, a young boy named Eli went missing shortly after downloading the app, and he was never found.
Have you ever seen someone with extremely long hair? Well, a man from Yamata village in Japan saw a woman with very long hair nearly down to her knees, but things were much stranger than they seemed. He was walking down a narrow street when this woman approached him, and as he walked closer, he realized that she'd been smiling the whole time. But this wasn't a normal friendly smile. There was something strange about it that made him feel creeped out, but he smiled back anyways because he found her beautiful. This would be his last mistake. In that moment, her hair rose up and stuck to him. Strands of hair hooked onto his clothes. He ran as fast as he could, terrified. He got home quickly, locked the door, but couldn't fall asleep all night. The next morning, he felt a bit better, so he opened the door to try to go to work, but he saw that on the other side, his door was covered in scratches. He had run into Hariona, the long-haired woman from Japanese urban legend whose hair can turn into hooks. She's also known as a smiling woman, as she usually smiles at people from the shadows and also specifically targets men who smile back at her. Comment below what you would do if you ran into her, and follow to see more.